I'll never forget the night my world turned to ashes, the night my home, the one I built with my own two hands, was devoured by flames while I stood helpless across the street, watching it collapse into glowing embers. For months leading up to that night, I'd been at war with the HOA, but mostly with one person, Karen, the self proclaimed president who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She had always hated me since the day I moved into Willow Creek Estates. My property was the largest on the cul-de-sac, and she couldn't stand that I had built a detached workshop without first begging for her approval. From that moment on, she made it her mission to make my life miserable. Constant violation notices, complaints about my truck being parked in the driveway, even letters accusing my dog of being too loud when he barely barked. I tolerated it all until she tried to fine me thousands of dollars for having unapproved paint colors on my fence. When I refused to pay and hired a lawyer, that's when things escalated beyond anything I could imagine. The weeks before the fire were filled with tension. She'd walk by my property, phone in hand, snapping pictures and muttering about taking it up with the board. My security cameras caught her pacing near my workshop one evening, but she claimed she was just walking her cat, though the footage clearly showed she had a gas can in her hand. I turned it into the local authorities, but they said it wasn't enough evidence to accuse anyone. Coincidental, they called it. So I reinforced my home's security, double-checked my locks, and tried to sleep with one eye open. Then, on a cold Thursday night in February, I woke to the sound of my dog barking frantically. I smelled smoke before I saw the glow, a sinister orange light creeping along the walls of my workshop. I ran outside in my pajamas, barefoot, just in time to see the flames leap to the main house. I called 911, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. The firefighters arrived within minutes, but it was too late. The fire tore through everything I owned, my family heirlooms, years of woodworking tools, photographs, furniture, gone in one roaring nightmare. As the last wall fell, I saw her across the street, Karen, standing there in her robe, holding a mug like it was a show she'd been waiting to watch. The faint glow of fire reflected in her glasses as she pretended to be shocked, even clutching her chest for dramatic effect. But I saw the smirk, the satisfaction she couldn't completely hide. When the firefighters asked if I suspected anyone, I didn't hesitate. I told them about her history of harassment, the threats, the gas can, everything. They took notes, and an investigation was launched. Over the next few weeks, I stayed with my brother in the next town while the fire department completed their report. I visited the site. Once, the smell of charred wood and melted plastic still heavy in the air. My once beautiful home was nothing more than rubble. But what chilled me most wasn't the destruction. It was what the investigators found. Traces of accelerant poured near my workshop and back door. That meant it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. And when they pulled footage from a nearby street camera, there she was again, Karen, walking toward my house minutes before the fire started. She thought she was clever, staying out of view of my own cameras, but she didn't know about the city's traffic pole lens capturing everything. I was furious, but also terrified. How far had her obsession gone? She'd gone from petty fines and neighborhood gossip to full-blown arson. The police brought her in for questioning, and the entire neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Some people defended her, saying she'd never do such a thing, while others admitted they weren't surprised. When she was arrested, the smug look she always wore was gone, replaced by a pale, shaken mask of disbelief. For the first time, Karen was facing real consequences. The charges were serious: arson, property destruction, and endangering life. I thought that would bring me peace, but instead, I felt hollow. My home was gone, my memories scorched, and I was living out of a suitcase. Reporters even started showing up, eager to cover the HOA arson case, as they called it. I ignored them, focusing on rebuilding my life, but part of me burned just as hot as the fire that had taken everything. When the prosecutor called to tell me her court date was set, I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Months had passed, yet it felt like the embers of that night still smoldered inside me. I didn't know what I'd feel seeing her again, sitting behind that defense table, But I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about justice anymore. This was personal. And as I prepared for the day I'd face her in court, I promised myself one thing: no matter how calm she looked, no matter how many excuses she gave, I'd make sure the truth burned brighter than her lies. The months following Karen's arrest were a blur of court dates, paperwork, and endless interviews with investigators who seemed both fascinated and horrified by the case. I found myself spending more time inside police stations and law offices than anywhere else, reliving that night over and over again, answering the same questions until my voice went hoarse. The detectives were meticulous, combing through every inch of evidence from the ashes of my home. They discovered multiple ignition points, traces of gasoline in the soil, and even a half-melted lighter near the fence line. What sealed the case, though, was the city surveillance footage. Grainy but clear enough to identify Karen's distinct walk, her long robe, and the familiar bob of her blonde hair as she crept along the sidewalk with a container in hand. She'd tried to disguise herself with a hat, but even her gait was recognizable. The day the police officially charged her with first-degree arson and reckless endangerment, I was there, sitting silently in the back of the station, watching her being led in handcuffs. She glared at me through the glass wall, eyes full of venom, as if I were the villain in her story. The neighborhood went into chaos. Some people who used to adore her, those who believed every word she said at HOA meetings, turned their backs. Others whispered that I must have set her up, that this was my way of getting revenge for all the fines and disputes. But I didn't care what anyone thought. I had lost everything, and now justice was finally on the horizon. When the trial date was announced, I received a subpoena to appear as the primary witness. My stomach dropped the moment I read it. I had imagined this confrontation for months, but the reality of it, facing her again in a courtroom, hit me harder than I expected. The morning of the trial, the courthouse was crowded with journalists and curious residents. The local news had turned it into a spectacle. HOA president accused of burning neighbor's home. I walked through the crowd, trying to keep my composure as cameras flashed and microphones were shoved in my face. Inside, the courtroom felt cold and sterile, the kind of place where every sound echoed too loudly. Karen sat at the defense table in a neatly pressed blazer, her hair perfectly styled, acting as though she were the victim of some grand misunderstanding. Her lawyer, a slick-talking man in a gray suit, whispered something to her that made her smirk. I clenched my fists, reminding myself to stay calm. The prosecutor, a determined woman named Erica Grant, opened the case with a fiery statement outlining the evidence. The motive, the surveillance footage, the accelerant traces, and years of harassment that built up to the crime. As she spoke, I could see jurors shifting uncomfortably, some exchanging glances. Then came the defense's turn. Karen's attorney claimed she had been framed, that the footage was coincidental, and that she was merely walking her cat as she'd done many times before. The absurdity of it made me want to laugh, but I bit my tongue. When my name was called to the stand, I felt my heartbeat echo in my ears. I walked up, took the oath, and sat down, facing both the jury and the woman who had destroyed my life. Karen avoided my gaze at first, pretending to be disinterested, but when the prosecutor began questioning me, she lifted her eyes, and I could see it. That same simmering malice she'd shown the night of the fire. Erica asked me to recount everything from the first HOA dispute to the night of the blaze. I told him about the Gaskin sighting, the harassment, the countless notices, and the confrontation we'd had weeks before the fire when she screamed that I was ruining the neighborhood. I described waking up to the smell of smoke, running barefoot into the freezing night, and watching everything I owned turn to cinders while she stood there watching. The courtroom was silent except for my voice and the scribbling of pens. At one point, I caught a juror wiping away tears. When the defense cross-examined, Karen's lawyer tried to twist my words, suggesting I was emotionally unstable after losing my house and that I harbored resentment toward the HOA. I stayed calm, responding carefully, refusing to let them bait me into anger. I didn't lose my house because of resentment, I said firmly. I lost it because someone decided her power meant more than my life. Karen shifted in her seat, her lips tightening. The trial continued for days, filled with forensic experts, fire marshals, and character witnesses. The prosecution brought out the charred remnants of the lighter, the chemical analysis of the accelerant, and even text messages Karen had sent to another HOA member, ranting about how she wished my ugly property would just burn down. That text alone sent a wave of murmurs through the courtroom. Her lawyer objected, of course, calling it irrelevant, but the judge overruled him. Each new piece of evidence painted her guilt more vividly. Yet Karen kept her composure, staring straight ahead with an expression that seemed to say, "I'll get out of this." Outside of court, my life was a mess of insurance battles and reconstruction plans. My brother kept telling me not to let her win by dragging me down emotionally, but it was hard. Every night, I replayed her smirk in my mind, the firelight flickering across her face, the way she looked almost satisfied watching my home fall apart. I wanted closure, not just legally, but emotionally. I wanted her to feel what it was like to have everything taken away. As the trial neared its end, both sides prepared their closing arguments. The prosecutor's tone was sharp, passionate, almost poetic in how she described the arrogance of someone who thought they could commit such a crime and get away with it. The defense leaned on doubt, telling the jury that no one actually saw Karen light the fire. But when Erica played the final piece of footage, the grainy video of Karen's silhouette standing in my yard just before the flames appeared, it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. Even Karen's lawyer hesitated for a split second. The jury watched silently as the screen froze on her image, a shadow framed by the first flicker of firelight. In that moment, I knew the outcome was inevitable. Karen, for all her arrogance, had finally trapped herself in her own lies. The judge announced that the verdict would be read the following Monday, and as we all stood to leave, Karen finally looked at me directly, her eyes narrowing to slits. "You think you've won?" she whispered as she was led out. "This isn't over." Her voice was low, venomous, but all I felt was relief, because for the first time, I knew she was wrong. This time it was over. The Monday of the verdict felt like Judgment Day, not just for Karen, but for me too. I arrived at the courthouse before sunrise, standing in the crisp morning air as the world around me slowly came alive. The parking lot was half filled with news vans, and reporters loitered near the steps, clutching microphones and cameras like vultures circling for a headline. I ignored them, my mind laser-focused on what was to come. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The jurors had been deliberating all weekend, and everyone knew that whatever they decided would define the rest of our lives, hers and mine. Karen arrived a few minutes later, escorted by officers, still dressed to impress in a navy blue suit and pearls, like she was attending a charity gala instead of facing prison. Even in shackles, she carried herself with that same unearned authority, her chin lifted, her lips curved in that faint, knowing smirk. As she walked past me, she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Enjoy your little victory dance." I didn't reply. The judge entered, and the room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioner and the nervous tapping of a pen somewhere behind me. When the foreman of the jury stood to deliver the verdict, my pulse thundered in my ears. On the charge of first-degree arson, he began, voice steady but serious, "We find the defendant, Karen Thompson, guilty." The word hit me like a wave, relief, vindication, exhaustion all crashing together. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, followed by whispers and the muffled sobs of one of Karen's so-called friends sitting behind her. On the charge of reckless endangerment, the foreman continued, "We find the defendant guilty." The judge nodded solemnly, jotting notes before turning his gaze toward Karen. Her face had changed, the mask of arrogance cracked. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. For the first time, I saw her for what she truly was, not the all-powerful HOA tyrant, but a bitter, small woman who had finally run out of control. The prosecutor, Erica Grant, let out a slow breath beside me, her eyes softening with something close to empathy as she placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. But in that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like all the energy I'd spent fighting this battle had drained out of me at once. The judge announced sentencing would occur 2 weeks later, giving both sides time to prepare. Karen was escorted out of the courtroom, her lawyer trailing behind her, his expression grim. As she passed me, she stared straight into my eyes, cold, unblinking, and for just a heartbeat, I saw something unhinged flicker there. It wasn't regret. It was hatred. Outside, the crowd erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed, journalists shouted questions, and neighbors whispered rumors that spread like wildfire. Some called her a monster. Others said she was mentally unstable. I didn't stick around to hear any of it. I walked away down the courthouse steps, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of her presence pressing down on me. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to rebuild, not just my home, but my peace of mind. My insurance claim finally went through, and the reconstruction process began. It felt strange watching workers pour concrete where my living room once stood, like trying to resurrect a ghost. Every hammer strike echoed memories of what had been lost. Family dinners, quiet nights by the fireplace, laughter with friends. I spent hours at the site, sketching plans, imagining new beginnings. But at night, the nightmares came back, visions of fire, of her face illuminated by the flames, of her voice whispering, "You think you've won?" I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, realizing that while the verdict was in my favor, the trauma still lingered like smoke in my lungs. When the day of sentencing arrived, I dressed in a plain black suit and drove myself to court. This time, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. I was ready. Karen entered, shackled at the wrists, looking more subdued than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the expensive suit, now replaced by the standard orange of the county jail. Her hair was tied back, her posture less commanding. But even then, she held onto a thin strand of pride, glancing around the room like she still owned it. The judge reviewed the case, the evidence, and the damage she had caused, not just the physical destruction, but the emotional toll, the danger to human life, the sheer cruelty of her actions. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but filled with weight. "Miss Thompson, your actions were deliberate, malicious, and put lives at risk. You abused your authority and your position in this community to harass and harm someone who did nothing but stand up to your abuse. The court sentences you to 20 years in state prison." The sound of the gavel struck like thunder. Karen froze. Her mouth opened as if to protest, but no sound came out. The deputies moved in to escort her away, and she twisted in their grip, shouting suddenly, her voice cracking. "He deserved it," she screamed, pointing at me, eyes wild. "He ruined everything. He made me do it." The courtroom erupted, and the officers tightened their hold as they dragged her out. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the woman who had once wielded power over the entire neighborhood, now reduced to a shouting, desperate shell. It was over, truly over. Or so I thought. After the sentencing, people I hadn't spoken to in months began reaching out, neighbors offering apologies, friends checking in, even strangers sending letters of support. The local paper published an editorial calling it the downfall of HOA tyranny. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I just felt tired. Justice had been served, but closure still felt distant. I drove back to the empty lot where my house once stood, now surrounded by construction equipment and the faint smell of fresh lumber. I stood there for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and red, the same colors that had once destroyed everything. Only this time, they looked beautiful. I took a deep breath, finally letting go of the bitterness that had kept me chained. As I turned to leave, I heard my phone buzz. It was a message from the prosecutor, sentencing complete. She's being transferred to state custody tomorrow. I stared at the screen, nodded to myself, and whispered, "Good." I thought that would be the end of it, but as I soon learned, Karen's story wasn't finished. Because 2 weeks later, when I walked into the courthouse for an unrelated insurance hearing, I wasn't expecting to see her again, let alone sitting there in the courtroom, staring right back at me. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I thought my connection to Karen was over forever. I'd started sleeping better, visiting the construction site of my new home more often, and even considering a short trip out of town to clear my head. But fate had a twisted sense of humor, because the day I walked back into the courthouse for what was supposed to be a simple insurance settlement hearing, my world tilted on its axis again. The courtroom was smaller this time, quieter, with only a handful of people seated along the benches. I was there to finalize paperwork regarding my insurance payout, a tedious but necessary process, and I was flipping through documents when I heard the door open behind me. Heavy footsteps echoed across the tile floor, and as I turned, my heart stopped cold. Sitting there, escorted by two officers, was Karen Thompson. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. She had been sentenced 20 years, no parole for at least 10, and yet there she was dressed in a tan prison uniform, her wrists shackled, her expression unreadable. She looked thinner, paler, but the same sharp glint in her eyes remained. The officers guided her to the defendant's chair in the back corner, and I overheard one of them mention something about additional proceedings. My lawyer leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, this isn't about you. She's being brought in for a procedural review on another charge." But that didn't ease the tension coiling in my chest. As the judge entered, everyone stood, and I forced myself to focus on my own case, though my thoughts kept drifting toward her. I could feel her gaze boring into the side of my head, steady, unblinking. It was like she was trying to burn holes through me with her eyes, the same way she had burned my home. I tried to ignore her, signing forms, answering questions, nodding when my lawyer spoke, but every time I glanced up, she was staring, smiling faintly, like she knew something I didn't. When my portion of the hearing ended, I gathered my papers and prepared to leave. I had to pass by her to exit, and as I did, she leaned forward ever so slightly and whispered, "Miss me?" Her voice was low, mocking, laced with venomous amusement. My stomach twisted, and before I could respond, one of the officers barked. "Ma'am, back up." She obeyed with a smirk, sinking back into her chair, her shackles rattling. The judge gave her a sharp warning about her behavior, but she just smiled sweetly and said, "I was only being polite." I walked out, my pulse hammering in my ears, trying to convince myself it didn't matter, that she couldn't hurt me anymore. But deep down, I knew better. People like Karen didn't stop when they lost. They schemed, plotted, and waited outside. My lawyer tried to reassure me. "It's probably just procedural," he said. "She's got pending HOA fraud charges, apparently. Something about embezzling community funds before the fire." That part didn't surprise me at all. Of course, she'd been stealing money. Control wasn't enough for her. She had to profit too. I drove home that day with my mind spinning. The image of her face in that courtroom haunted me more than I wanted to admit. She didn't look broken or remorseful. She looked like she was planning her next move. That night, I sat by my brother's fireplace, staring into the flames, the irony not lost on me. I wondered what kind of person could burn someone's home and still smile in their presence afterward. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Karen's obsession hadn't been about me personally, it had been about power. My refusal to bow to her authority had challenged her fragile ego, and she'd turned that insecurity into hatred. But even in chains, she still thought she had power over me. A few days later, I received a call from Detective Ramirez, the lead investigator on the arson case. His voice was tense. "You should know, Karen's team filed an appeal," he said. My stomach dropped. "On what grounds?" I asked. "They're claiming procedural mishandling of evidence," he replied. "Her new attorney is arguing that some of the surveillance footage was improperly submitted." I could barely speak. "Does that mean she could get out?" "Unlikely," he said quickly. "The evidence is strong, and her original confession during questioning still stands. But be prepared, this might drag on for months." Confession? My mind froze. What confession? There was a pause on the line. "She admitted to being near your property that night," he said carefully, "but claimed she didn't start the fire, that she saw someone else running away." It was a lie, obviously, but hearing that she'd spoken about that night again made my skin crawl. I thanked him for the call and hung up, but sleep didn't come easy after that. The next week, I was called back to court to sign follow-up documents related to the appeal. When I arrived, Karen was there again, this time sitting quietly, her hands folded neatly on the table. She looked different, not unhinged, not smug, but eerily calm, as if she'd made peace with something I couldn't see. When she saw me, she smiled, not mockingly this time, but softly, almost pitying. It sent chills down my spine. As I passed by her, she whispered again, "You should have moved away." My breath caught. "Excuse me," I muttered, but before I could say more, the officer tugged her arm and led her away. I stood there frozen, her words echoing in my mind. "You should have moved away." What did she mean by that? That night, I got my answer. Around midnight, I received a call from one of my new neighbors near the construction site. "Hey, man," he said nervously, "you might want to get over here. Someone's been walking around your lot. We saw flashlights." My blood ran cold. I jumped into my truck and drove straight there. The site was quiet when I arrived, but my headlights caught something, a message scrawled in black paint across the temporary fencing. For words that froze me where I stood. "See you soon, Kay." I looked around, heart pounding, but the night was silent except for the whisper of the wind through the half-built walls. Karen was behind bars, or so I thought. Either someone was doing her dirty work, or she'd already found a way to reach beyond those prison walls. The night I found that message on the fence, "See you soon, Kay," something inside me snapped. I'd told myself for months that I was safe, that the fire, the trial, and the sentencing had all ended the nightmare. But seeing those words in black dripping paint under the flicker of my truck's headlights made my blood turn to ice. My first instinct was to call the police, and within 15 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing blue and red against the half-built structure of my new house. The officers examined the graffiti, took photos, and filed a report. One of them, a young guy named Harris, turned to me and said, "We'll check the cameras in the area. Don't worry, sir. She's locked up tight." But worry was all I could do. I barely slept that night, staring at the ceiling in my brother's guest room, the words looping in my head like a curse. The next morning, Detective Ramirez called me again. We reviewed the footage, he said grimly. "Someone in a hoodie came by your property around midnight. Couldn't get a clear face, but they moved like they knew the place. Confident. No hesitation." I rubbed my temples, exhaustion weighing me down. "You think she sent someone?" He hesitated. "Possibly. She still has supporters, people from the HOA, who sympathize with her. One or two even visited her at the detention center last week." My stomach churned. Visited her? Why? "She's claiming innocence," he said, "and apparently convincing some people she was framed. She told one of them you had it out for her from the start. The idea that Karen could still manipulate people from inside a prison cell made my skin crawl. Over the next few days, I noticed strange things happening around the construction site. Tools went missing. The site manager told me someone had cut the locks on the storage shed one night, but hadn't taken anything, just moved things around. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. The workers grew uneasy, muttering about bad energy at the site. I doubled my security, motion lights, cameras, even a private guard at night, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Then came the letter. It arrived without a return address, postmarked from a neighboring county. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, looping cursive that I'd seen countless times on those HOA violation notices. My name was written neatly across the envelope, and inside was a single sheet of lined paper. It read, "You thought fire was the worst I could do. You still don't understand me. But you will. No signature, but I didn't need one." My hands shook as I read it over and over, my brain refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. I took the letter straight to Detective Ramirez. He looked at it, sighed heavily, and said, "We'll trace the mail. But honestly, she's in custody. It could be a copycat." I wanted to believe him, but something in his tone told me even he wasn't sure. That night, I sat by the window, watching the shadows stretch across the yard, waiting for something to happen. Around 2 a.m., the motion light outside my brother's house flicked on. My heart lurched as I peeked through the blinds, expecting to see someone there, but there was nothing. just the faint sway of tree branches. I told myself I was being paranoid, that trauma had rewired my instincts to see threats everywhere. But the next morning, when I walked out to my truck, I found a small pile of ash on the hood, neatly placed as though someone had scooped it up and set it there on purpose. That was the breaking point. I decided to move back onto the construction site during the day. To keep watch personally, the foreman, a burly man named Vince, agreed to let me help with minor work while we rebuilt the frame. Being there, hammering nails and painting beams, gave me a sense of control. Yet, even in daylight, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. Sometimes I'd spot a car parked at the far end of the street, idling, and when I walked toward it, it would pull away slowly. One afternoon, a woman from the old HOA board stopped by, Linda, one of Karen's longtime allies. She approached cautiously, sunglasses hiding her eyes. "I just wanted to say," she began softly, "I don't think Karen did what they said. She's been writing letters from prison. And, well, she's convinced me there's more to this story." I stared at her in disbelief. "She burned my house down, Linda. She almost killed me." Linda shook her head sadly. "That's what they want you to think. She said someone framed her to get her out of the way." I cut her off right there. "You need to leave, Linda. Right now." She hesitated, then dropped a folded note on the porch before walking off. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. Inside, written in the same looping cursive, were the words, "They'll never believe you when it happens again." My vision tunneled. The handwriting matched the letter I'd already given to the police. I called Ramirez immediately explaining everything, but he told me calmly, "We're increasing patrols near your property, but until we can prove it's her or one of her associates, there's not much we can do." Not much they could do. I hung up, feeling the frustration burn through me like acid. That night, I armed myself with a baseball bat and stayed awake by the window, waiting. Hours passed in silence until I heard the faint crunch of gravel outside. My pulse spiked. I grabbed the bat, stepping onto the porch. A shape moved near the fence, small, fast, darting between shadows. "Hey!" I shouted and the figure froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other through the darkness. Then it bolted. I chased it halfway down the road before it vanished into the trees. All I saw was a flash of pale hair under the moonlight, and though I knew it couldn't have been her, she was supposed to be behind bars, it looked exactly like Karen. When the police arrived again, I told them everything, and one of the officers sighed. "Sir, she's still incarcerated as of this morning. We verified it." But that didn't make me feel any safer. The graffiti, the letter, the ash, the figure, they weren't coincidences. Someone was doing her bidding, and they knew how to get close without being caught. As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluding me once again, I realized that Karen didn't need to be free to haunt me. She'd already built a network of people who believed in her lies, and they were out there now, carrying on her obsession. The fire had destroyed my house, but the real damage was only just beginning. The night the flames returned was the moment I realized Karen's reach extended far beyond prison walls. It began quietly. Just another cold evening at the half-finished house, with the wind sighing through the skeletal beams and the smell of fresh lumber hanging in the air. I had insisted on staying overnight for the week, too paranoid to leave the place unattended, and I'd set up a small cot and space heater inside what would one day be my living room. I was exhausted, my nerves frayed from weeks of tension, yet my mind refused to rest. Every creak of the wood sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like someone breathing on my neck. Around midnight, I finally drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, only to be woken moments later by the sharp pop of wood cracking. I sat up, instantly, my heart hammering. Then came the smell, acrid, unmistakable, burning. I stumbled out of the cot and saw it through the open frame of the house, a faint orange flicker at the edge of the construction lot, dancing like a ghost. "No," I whispered, already running for the door. When I rounded the corner, I froze in horror. The storage shed was on fire, the same shed where we kept paint, chemicals, and electrical tools, enough to fuel an explosion if the flames spread. I grabbed the extinguisher from inside and sprinted toward it, But by the time I got close, the heat was unbearable. The fire roared to life, licking up the wooden frame and spitting sparks into the night. I screamed for help, my voice echoing through the empty neighborhood. One of the security guards came running from his post by the road, calling in the fire department as we tried to contain the flames, but it was useless. The shed collapsed in on itself, a shower of sparks lighting up the sky. It was déjà vu. Another fire, another loss, another night where my life was swallowed by the same orange hell. The firefighters arrived within minutes, and this time they were ready. They extinguished the blaze before it spread to the main structure, but the damage was already done. Once again, I stood in the glow of flashing lights, surrounded by smoke and ruin. The chief, a grizzled man with soot-streaked cheeks, approached me and said, "You've got someone who really wants you gone, son." I nodded, unable to speak. The police arrived soon after, cordoning off the site and collecting evidence. As they examined the ashes, one of them found something half buried under debris, a charred piece of paper sealed inside a plastic sleeve. They handed it to me carefully. When I opened it, my stomach turned. The message, scrawled in familiar handwriting, read, "Round 2. Still warm yet?" My vision blurred with anger. "She's behind this," I told Detective Ramirez when he arrived, breathless from being called out of bed. "I don't care where she is or who she's paying, this is her." Ramirez sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's still locked up. I checked just this morning. But you're not wrong about the possibility she's got someone on the outside." He crouched by the ashes, examining the melted remains of a lighter. "Same pattern," he muttered. "Same accelerant traces as the first fire." "Then what are you waiting for?" I snapped, "Arrest her again." He gave me a tired look. "We can't charge someone twice for the same crime if we don't have new evidence tying her to this. But I'll dig. I promise you that." I wanted to believe him, but promises didn't stop the nightmares, didn't rebuild what I kept losing, didn't erase the image of her gloating face. For the next few days, the property became a circus of investigators and reporters again. The headlines screamed, "Second fire strikes same victim." Connection TO convicted HOA president. The neighborhood, already shaken from the trial, went into full panic mode. People began installing cameras, floodlights, even fences topped with spikes. But for me, safety felt like a fantasy. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the ruins of the shed, the embers still glowing faintly, and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The wind answered, carrying the faint hiss of dying fire. 2 days later, I got a call from Ramirez. "You need to come down to the station," he said, his voice clipped. "We found something." When I arrived, he showed me a series of photographs, security footage from a gas station 3 blocks away from my property. The timestamp matched the night of the second fire. The person in the footage was wearing a hoodie, gloves, and a mask, but when they turned slightly toward the camera, my breath caught. The eyes, cold, sharp, calculating, looked just like hers. "It's not her," Ramirez said before I could speak, "but the resemblance is uncanny. We ran the plate on the vehicle they used. It belongs to someone named Lillian Carter." "Who's that?" I asked. Ramirez grimaced. "Her cousin." The world tilted. "Her cousin?" "Yeah," he said. "Apparently, she visited Karen in prison last month. We're bringing her in." When they arrested Lillian 2 days later, she didn't resist. She even smiled for the camera. During questioning, she admitted to visiting my property, but claimed Karen told her to protect what was left of the neighborhood. Ramirez told me later that she kept repeating one sentence over and over. Karen says he still doesn't understand. The more I heard, the more I realized Karen hadn't just orchestrated revenge. She'd built a cult of loyalty out of manipulation and fear. Even from her cell, she was puppeteering others to carry on her vendetta. That night, I sat in my truck outside the reconstruction site, staring at the blackened remains of the shed, and it hit me that no amount of rebuilding could fix this. I wasn't fighting one person anymore. I was fighting her legacy. My phone buzzed, and for a second, I considered ignoring it. But When I glanced at the screen, the number made my blood run cold. It was the state penitentiary. Against my better judgment, I answered. A recorded voice came on first. "You are receiving a call from inmate Karen Thompson. Do you accept?" My hand shook, but I pressed one. A pause. Then her voice, calm and chilling, slithered through the line. "You really should stop rebuilding," she said softly. "It only makes it easier for me to start over." I froze. "How did you?" "Good night, neighbor," she interrupted, her tone dripping with amusement, and the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, the echo of her voice crawling through my skull. She was locked away, yet somehow she was still winning. And I knew, with every instinct in my body, that this wasn't over. Not even close. In the days following Karen's chilling phone call, sleep became a stranger to me. Every creak in the night felt like a whisper from the flames. Every flicker of light across the yard made my heart leap with suspicion. I couldn't focus on anything except the words she had said. "You really should stop rebuilding." It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise, one she intended to keep, even from behind prison walls. I drove straight to Detective Ramirez's office the next morning, my eyes bloodshot and my hands trembling around a cup of stale coffee. "She called me," I said the moment I walked in. Ramirez looked up, frowning. "Karen? From prison?" I nodded. She told me to stop rebuilding. She knew about the fire, details only someone there that night could know. Ramirez swore under his breath and grabbed his coat. "We're going to the penitentiary." The drive, there was tense and silent, the gray morning sky mirroring the weight in my chest. When we arrived, the warden greeted us with polite confusion. "She's been on good behavior," he said. "We monitor all her calls." "Apparently not well enough," Ramirez muttered, flashing his badge. We were led through a maze of sterile corridors until we reached the visitation block. Karen was already waiting behind the glass, her prison uniform crisp, her posture straight, her smile razor sharp. When she saw me, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the counter like this was some friendly reunion. Well, she purred through the phone. "You look tired. Still losing sleep over your ashes?" I gritted my teeth, trying not to give her the satisfaction. "You called me," I said. "You think I don't know you had someone torch my property again?" She tilted her head, pretending to think. "Oh, that? Such a shame, isn't it? Fires are so unpredictable. You never know where they'll start." "Cut it," Ramirez barked. "We have evidence linking your cousin to the arson." Karen's smile didn't fade. It only deepened, becoming something eerie, detached. "Lillian was loyal," she said softly. "Loyalty's rare these days. You wouldn't understand that, detective. You're too busy protecting people who don't deserve their land." I slammed my fist against the glass. "You've ruined everything, Karen. You destroyed my home, my peace. Why? What did I ever do to you?" For the first time, her expression shifted, not to anger, but to something almost pitying. "You built that house on what was meant to be the community's reserve land," she said, voice low. "That property was supposed to be the HOA's pride. You bought it through a loophole when our management changed. You think I didn't notice?" My mind reeled. "That's a lie," I spat. "I bought that land fair and square. The county deed confirms it." She smirked. "Deeds can be rewritten. Loyalty can't." Before I could respond, a guard signaled that our time was up. Karen picked up her cup of water, took a slow sip, and whispered through the glass, "You'll see soon enough. They still believe in me." The phone clicked dead. Ramirez and I exchanged a grim look. "We'll reopen the investigation into her contacts," he said. "If she's running communication through other inmates or outside visitors, we'll find out." Over the next week, we did exactly that. The FBI's cybercrime unit joined the case, scanning through hundreds of recorded calls and letters sent to and from Karen. That's when they discovered it, an intricate web of coded messages, hidden in letters she sent to legal consultants, written in innocuous community reports and meeting minutes. Every few lines contained phrases that, when pieced together, formed instructions. "Keep the flame alive. Watch his land. The ashes are not enough. It wasn't just revenge, it was obsession, a manifesto of control. Ramirez briefed me late one night at the station, spreading out the decoded transcripts on the table. She's been orchestrating this from day one, he said, his voice heavy. She's got at least 3 people on the outside, neighbors, ex-board members, maybe even contractors. They're acting on her behalf. My stomach dropped. You're saying she's got a network? He nodded grimly. And they're not done. That realization hit harder than any fire ever could. This wasn't random vengeance, it was organized, ideological. To her, I wasn't a man who'd rebuilt after tragedy. I was a symbol of defiance against her authority, her control. Every time I tried to move forward, it challenged her delusion that the HOA still belonged to her. The following morning, the warden called me personally. "We've moved her to isolation," he said. "No phone privileges, no visitation." She's furious. Good, I muttered, but the relief was short-lived. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly. It was Ramirez again. She escaped, he said, his voice low, tense, almost disbelieving. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean she escaped? How? During transport, he cut in. She was being moved to another facility for psychiatric evaluation. The van was intercepted on the highway. The guards are alive but sedated. She's gone. The words hit like a thunderclap. I shot out of bed, heart pounding, scanning the darkness of my unfinished house as if she might be there already. Ramirez's voice crackled through the phone again. "We've got roadblocks set up, state troopers on every route, but I wanted you to know first. You need to leave town tonight." I looked around the house at the bare walls, the smell of sawdust, the faint marks of the last fire still staining the foundation. "No," I said after a moment, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not running again." There was silence on the line before Ramirez sighed. "Then, at least let me post someone outside your property. Do what you have to," I said, but I'm not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me scared. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness, every shadow now a potential threat, every creak of the frame a whisper of warning. Somewhere out there, Karen was free again, angry, obsessive, and closer than ever. I didn't know when she would strike, but I knew it wouldn't be long. The war between us had begun years ago with a simple HOA dispute, but now it was something else entirely. It wasn't about rules, property lines, or neighborhood pride. It was about power. And as the first faint hint of dawn painted the sky, I realized the only way this would end was if one of us finally lost everything completely. When I learned that Karen had escaped custody, the world seemed to shrink around me. Every sound outside my half-rebuilt home became a warning, every passing car a ghost of her presence. The air itself felt heavier, charged with something invisible but suffocating, fear. Ramirez stationed 2 patrol cars near the end of my driveway and told me not to step outside after dark. But I knew deep down that police lines wouldn't stop her. Karen was more than vengeful. She was methodical, manipulative, and obsessed. She'd waded through years of prison walls. A few uniformed officers weren't going to make her hesitate. The first few days after her escape were eerily quiet, almost tauntingly so. Reporters camped outside the property line, asking for statements about the burned house victim versus the escaped HOA arsonist. I ignored them, barricading myself inside, checking my locks every hour. By the 3rd night, exhaustion pulled me under, but even sleep wasn't safe. In my dream, I saw my house engulfed again, the walls melting, the air thick with smoke, and her voice whispering through it all. "You can't rebuild what doesn't belong to you." I woke with a start drenched in sweat, and then I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, deliberate. I froze, straining to listen. The motion sensor lights flicked on, flooding the yard in pale light. Nothing moved. For a second, I thought it was my imagination until I saw a figure standing just beyond the fence watching me. My breath hitched. She was dressed in black, her hair pulled back, her posture unmistakable. Karen. She was thinner now, her face sharper, but her eyes burned with that same cold fury. Before I could reach for my phone, she stepped closer, her voice carrying through the night. "You rebuilt again," she said softly. "You really don't learn." My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and hit the emergency line, whispering to the dispatcher, "She's here." But when I looked up again, she was gone. The lights flickered out, plunging everything into darkness. A second later, the side of the house exploded into flame. The blast knocked me backward, heat searing my face as shards of glass rained down. I scrambled to my feet, coughing disoriented, and grabbed the extinguisher, but the fire was spreading too fast. It was as if the house itself had turned against me, every dry plank igniting with fury. Through the wall of smoke, I saw movement, a shadow slipping through the fire, her silhouette glowing in the inferno's light. "You don't deserve this land," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You stole it." I staggered toward her, coughing violently. "You burned everything I had." I shouted back. "You destroyed your own life for what control?" She laughed, the sound distorted by the roar of the flames. "Control is the only thing that matters. Without it, people like you think you can do whatever you want." The heat was unbearable now, smoke stinging my lungs as I stumbled toward the door. Karen lunged forward, grabbing a burning board from the wreckage, swinging it wildly. I dodged just in time, the edge grazing my arm, singeing my sleeve. The world narrowed to chaos, fire shouting pain. I tackled her to the ground, both of us rolling across the dirt outside as the structure behind us cracked and collapsed in a shower of sparks. She fought like someone possessed, clawing and kicking, screaming incoherently about rules and ownership. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights painted the burning ruins, and several officers rushed toward us. Karen jerked free from my grip and bolted toward the tree line. "Stop!" Ramirez's voice roared as he leapt from his cruiser, gun drawn. She didn't listen. The fire lit her path like a stage, her shadow long and trembling against the smoke. Just before she disappeared into the darkness, she turned back toward me. "You can't rebuild what's already gone," she shouted. "You'll never have peace." Then she vanished into the forest. The officers chased after her, their flashlights slicing through the smoke, while firefighters swarmed the burning skeleton of my home. I sat there in the dirt, trembling, watching the flames consume the last remnants of everything I had tried to hold on to. Hours passed before Ramirez returned, his expression grim. "We found her," he said, finally. "She didn't make it out of the woods." The fire spread faster than we thought. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the glowing horizon, where the forest burned like an endless sunset. Part of me felt relief, another part grief, but mostly I felt empty. It was over, but at what cost? The next morning, as the smoke cleared and the fire crews packed up, Ramirez stood beside me, looking at the smoldering remains. "You can rebuild again," he said quietly. "Start fresh, somewhere else." I looked at the scorched foundation, the blackened earth, the cracked remnants of what was once a home, and shook my head. "No," I said softly. She was right about one thing. Some things can't be rebuilt. I sold the land months later, donated the money to the local fire department, and left town without saying goodbye. But even now, when I drive through quiet neighborhoods or see a community board with its rules posted neatly in bold print, I think of her, of how far obsession can twist someone, how fire can both destroy and reveal what's buried deep inside us. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still wake to the smell of smoke and wonder if it's real. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's guilt, or maybe it's her voice, still echoing somewhere in the ashes, whispering the words that began and ended everything. "You really should stop rebuilding.